You are welcome along. Once again, in the absence of Enda Cole, you are stuck with Mutt and Jeff. Is that a reference you guys know over there, Mutt and Jeff? You're on mute, Alan. Come on, you amateur.
It's Mickey Beale rhyming slang for deaf, actually.
I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. Um, so yeah, we're joining you today as a duo instead of a trio, and that may become a pattern as we go along the season here. Maybe not for the rest of August, but as we go along, Mr. Cole is big shotting us. He's moving up in the world. He's becoming this international producing star. I've heard rumors of Hollywood with what's going on with the strikes and I know he's not going to be a scab and cross the line, but apparently there's a lot of recruiters out there for his production talent. So we may go to this format as the season goes along, where you're stuck with Alan and myself as kind of a review of weekend games, and then hopefully a longer episode later in the week, including Enda. Um, so that might be in the works, but it's a work in progress. So let us know if you have any comments or ideas or thoughts on that. So how are you getting on, Alan? You good today?
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, been lovely. Nice weekend. A good start to the season, I think.
Yes, it was. It was a good weekend. So yeah, we're going to review Ross County here, and I think the thought is to keep these episodes a little more tight on the review side. So getting into some of the performance data, some discussion on how the game went, just to kind of set the table. I had non-penalty XG at what, just under 2 to 1 basically was the performance. Obviously with the 4-2 result. So, Alan, what are your kind of initial thoughts on how the weekend went?
Yeah, listen, lots to get into, I think, and very felt very different about it when I've just watched it back and gathered the data and gone through all that process as I did than what I did at the time. At the time, it was kind of anxious, and I think it's again you tend to respond to game state. And I think as well, not just me, but a lot of people formulate a deeper view of the game based on what happens quite early in the game. And I think because the start of the game, actually, Ross County, I thought were excellent. They pressed Celtic high up the pitch. They really went after Celtic. They forced, I think, 5 corners in the first 15 minutes. It was 60 minutes before Celtic had a shot, and that shot actually resulted in a penalty in which they took the lead. But before that point, they had been not just very aggressive and successful with the pressing. They'd actually moved the ball, I thought, really well, and were really hounding Celtic's right flank. It looked like Ralston wasn't getting a lot of support from Abada potentially, and obviously with McGregor and O'Reilly being more like a double pivot and Turnbull perhaps pushed on a bit, there was some space that they found on that right hand side of Celtic's defence, and they were attacking that a lot, and a lot of danger came from that. And I think that kind of set the tone of it being feeling a bit uneasy about the game, and obviously, you know, cruised into a half-time lead despite all of that, and then the game kind of ended badly with another kind of poor goal being conceded. Um, and also the 2 goals that Celtic conceded in the second half were poor. So if you're like me and you focus on the negatives sometimes, you kind of came away with a few sort of mixed emotions. I thought that Celtic lacked fluidity was the sort of qualitative assessment I'd made in my head when I watched the game without actually looking back. But then once I started gathering the data, once I watched it back again, I actually found there to be way more similarities with how Celtic performed last season than what I'd picked up on the day, in terms of overwhelming possession, 759 completed passes, the XG differential. I had it well over 2. Post shot XG, Celtic were over 5. Um, you know, and it was just another pretty comprehensive win at the end of it, with admittedly some sloppy moments. So I think it was more like last season than perhaps I originally thought would be my summary. And we can dig into some of the specifics on that, but it was certainly untidy on occasions. I think the 2 goals conceded probably coloured that judgment a little bit. I think I've already made up my mind on Joe Hart, and that made me uneasy. I was a bit grumpy when he got picked to start. No, nothing against him. Honestly,
Yeah,
nothing against Joe at all, because
yeah.
lovely guy, great in the dressing room, great role model, all that. But the guy's reactions and the guy's speed have just gone, I think. And so, listen, I'm led to believe that probably a goalkeeper's on the card, so hopefully that'll get resolved. So that didn't get the game off to a good start when he kind of got picked. But how about
Yeah,
yourself?
well, when I saw the team sheet, I thought of you and Enda immediately in your radical ideas from last week. So, one big one
Yeah, I
certainly hit,
got 50-50.
well, absolutely, and we'll get on to that because that was, a bit of in some elements of our support, like a wet fart at Christmas dinner. I mean, that was quite the choice that was made. So we'll get into that. But I have not rewatched the game, so I find your comment. I always enjoy discussing this with you because I appreciate, because I have done that a lot in the past, how much more insight you gather by doing it. And I don't think there's anyone that, probably other than people that work at the club, that get the insight that you do because you've done it for so long and um, so consistently. So as I was watching the game, I kind of felt like the first half hour, and this is all me just winging it, like this was my memory, it was that we almost went into the game very similarly, in like an Ange 4-3-3 with some Rogers tweaks. And then because of how poorly it was going, quite frankly, it almost looked like he flipped the switch and went Rogers 4-2-3-1, to kind of get control of the midfield a little bit because we were getting a bit overrun by Ross County, which is alarming, in midfield. And that's kind of how I thought about it, because you started to see, um, interchanging, but to your point, O'Reilly kind of dropping into that double pivot alongside McGregor. So that's kind of how I saw the game. And if I was, if you look at kind of how the XG tracked and the shots tracked throughout the game, I mean, it really was the first 30 to 35 minutes. It was basically a coin flip. I mean, um, it was very comfortable for Ross County, actually, which is a little, again, alarming. And that, the other thing I'll throw in there, again, from a metric perspective, because I did look this up, and I always like to use some European reference points. So Ross County basically, with some various proxies, statistical proxies, they were more aggressive and forward in pressing us than we were against Real Madrid in the Champions League last season. So again, that kind of puts some context, I think, into how aggressive they were. And that's partly why when Enda asked us for our predictions last week, I'm usually pretty confident at Celtic Park forecasting high goal scoring for us, because Malky Mackay just comes in and does this, and it can work for periods of time. But as we see, ultimately we end up just tearing that kind of an opponent apart over 90 plus minutes, because they just can't keep it up. I mean, it just ultimately, and they could have ambushed us, and there could have been another, mistake or two in there, that where they did pick up an early goal. In an alternative universe, that certainly could have happened, and it would have been interesting if he would have switched, tactically, after that kind of early ambush. But so that's kind of how I thought about it. And any response to that non-reviewed framework?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, again, sometimes we need to give credit, I think, to Ross County. Mackay might have felt new manager. He might have maybe expected a few more changes. He knew that Celtic had at least two players in the defensive line that weren't necessarily first choices. So he went very bold with it, in that sense, and fair play. And also, I think, especially in that first period, the man-to-man marking in midfield was very effective. They were very aggressive in their man-to-man marking. This is maybe not a strength of O'Reilly or um, especially Turnbull, actually, to get themselves free. Turnbull's just not that quick over a yard, just to get that yard and get a foot out that you can take the ball in. Um, you got to add in the fact as well that Maeda is really, really poor with his back to goal. I mean, really poor with his back to goal. It takes him about 4 touches to control the ball sometimes, and he's just not effective at bringing it in and then doing something with it. I think Abada's a bit more technical, but he struggled to get on the ball as well. So And then again in the first 30 minutes, we didn't really see this one tactical revelation of Kyogo turning into the sort of Lionel Messi under Guardiola false nine, which was the one big sort of tactical revelation of the day, was this complete reimagining Kyogo as a complete footballer, which was just definitely the highlight of the day, really. And that didn't really happen in the first sort of 20 odd 30 minutes as well. And then if you look in the second half, their press almost completely collapsed. I don't know whether they're just not fit enough or they'd just given it so much in that first half, but they could not keep it up. And then
Yep.
once we Celtic got a lead, it was actually very, very comfortable. And I was looking at some of the tactical nuances today. I was looking at, how high was Celtic's line, for example, how intense was Celtic's pressing. But it's very difficult to get an accurate reading on one game, obviously, but also when you go into a 3-0 lead at half time and you just don't need to be chasing the game in the second half, a lot of these things tend to fall off. But actually, Celtic's pressing numbers, at least, were pretty. I mean, I think they averaged 112 presses last season, and it was 130 in this game, even though they were by game state, there was eight to be pressing. So that's interesting. I'm fascinated to see whether we see a fitter, even more aggressive pressing Celtic side this season. Interestingly, again, Maida didn't on the pressing. It was actually Turnbull and O'Reilly, sorry, and Turnbull that led on the pressing. And I think their roles as players who were almost getting beyond the striker. Both they scored 3 of the 4 goals. Obviously, one was a penalty, but again, they were trying to run beyond the striker on occasion. That was the other sort of aspect. But that all came from Kyogo dropping into pockets of space and his ability to not even have to take a pass in, but to be able to play first time and try and create from that was just revelatory, really, in terms of the things we had seen last season. But otherwise, actually, not something I picked up on the day, but when I watched on reback, on playback, Taylor and Ralston inverted quite a lot. They often fell into the middle areas. They often bolstered the midfield. The one thing I didn't really get a sense of, I couldn't work out, is I didn't see what the plan was for Maida and Abada. I couldn't see what they were trying to do. I didn't know what the sort of attacking patterns were that Rogers was looking for them, because I would have thought if Kyogo was dropping, you might see one or other of them starting to move diagonally across the space that Kyogo was leaving, but you just didn't really see that at all. So that was the one sort of dilemma, question I had, really, was what were we trying to do with those players? And then the other thing that I picked up on was just, and I kind of signposted this last week in an article, is more long balls, more lofted balls. Because again, he's realised he's got incredible pace and technical ability up front to hit the front three much earlier. And we saw, I think, 61 long balls attempted. I think last season it was 42 was the average. So, because quite an uptick in number of
Yeah.
long passes that were attempted. So, yeah, those were the other kind of takeaways I had in terms of the tactical side of it.
Well, I have one stat for the stat heads that I think, again, provides some context for the change in utilization with Kyogo. Is I believe, and again, this is just going off the Y Scout data, so always the caveat there. But basically, they have a passes received metric, which is pretty self-explanatory, and they had him at 32 for the game, and his high for last season by that metric in the league was 16. So basically, double the involvement of his highest amount from last season in the game on on the weekend. So yeah, I think
Well, it
that'll
was
be I'm
yeah,
sorry.
it was stunning. Yeah, yeah. I think so. I was going to say it's that. Yeah, I mean, he actually averaged 15 on ball possessions, if you want to call it that. So that could be a pass received, it could be a pass given, it could
Right.
be a sort of even a challenge, right? So 15 on ball events that he averaged last season, and in this game, like you say, it was actually 40, right? So it's just it's like a different having it's a completely different way of playing, basically,
Yep.
completely
Well, and
different.
and we've hinted at that, which was the because that's been Rogers in the past, is to have the whether it was Dembele or even Griffiths at times, drop, go out wide even. get involved in build-up. And we'll see how that, because Kyogo, I think, is the clear candidate to do that successfully. We'll see how he can do that relative to higher quality competition, where you've got maybe higher quality midfielders that he's going to have to navigate against, as well as center backs as far as the athletic scale. But it'll be interesting as we move on, how that plays out relative to O, which I think was interesting. He didn't, get selected to come in. It was basically move Maeda into the middle. And I think we'd probably agree that that does not lend itself as much to Maeda, that role, particularly given your comments earlier. So, yeah, I think that'll be something to watch and monitor as we go forward. Well, let's get back to the selection then, because the elephant in the room is the decision to go with, I think, David Turnbull, to a lesser extent, Ralston over Iwata. I don't think that was a big surprise. Given what sounds like the transfer news potentially with Starfelt, Nawrocki going in, not a surprise. Although Endo might have been surprised it wasn't Liam Scales, but the big one was obviously the decision with Turnbull over Hatate. So what were your thoughts when you saw that?
Well, as I say, the performance, Tati's performance against Athletic was so eye-opening to me. It just screamed of something, given how out of kilter it was with how excellent he'd been in Japanese friendlies. It just alarm bells, and it looks like there's been something happening there in terms of whether it's attitude, not following instructions, or whatever it might be. And Turnbull got the nod, and we know the thing is Turnbull's a bit like Starfield. He's one of these players that we all admire what he's good at, but and what he's not good at is you can't see it ever changing. He's not going to get a yard of pace. He's not going to become a sort of physical beast in the middle part there. Um, he can improve his passing. He can improve his non-set piece creativity, I think. But a lot of the physical sides of the game, which are his limitations, he can't. But then he was asked to do at the weekend was to get beyond Kyogo. Kyogo would come out, Turnbull would hit the space behind him, and he did that incredibly effectively. He had 2 goals. He could easily have had 3. So you can't say it wasn't a success in that sense. And it was possibly very telling. Maybe reading too much into it. How effusive Matt O'Reilly was about the fact that Turnbull had been rewarded and did start the game after the match in terms of squad dynamics as well. So very interesting. Turnbull did a good job. You can't argue with that. I don't think. I don't. I don't think either. Whether it's Turnbull or whether it's Hatate, I don't think it solves Celtic's midfield problem. I still think we're far too light as far as athleticism and overall pace is concerned. Looking at Matt O'Reilly, the way he played, he was very good at getting on the ball. He took responsibility. He was receiving it under pressure. He was receiving it from deep. He was linking the play very much like another McGregor in a sense. Um, I do get my reading of it is that McGregor and O'Reilly are the two names on the team sheet as far as central midfielder is concerned. Therefore, who's the third name? And I don't know at the moment. I can't think of a good option that solves the deficit of those 2 players and takes Celtic forward, especially at Champions League level. I think it's fine for County, whether it's Hatate uh, playing a deeper role or whether it's Turnbull breaking into the box. I don't think either of those things are a problem against Ross County, frankly. But I just don't think we've yet got the mix in midfield to really push forward in that regard. But listen, in terms of the selection on the day, you can't question it in terms of the outcome, I suppose. And Turnbull did do very, very, very well.
Well, and it's just to reopen an old wound. The context of the discussion initially about Hatate was, at least from my perspective, and again, that all germinated from my twisted mind, even though you took the brunt of the abuse, in that instance anyway. What was within the context of playing the attacking 8 role in Ange Ball at the Champions League level. And it was mostly due to the concern of his ability to defend and press effectively, meaning that as a unit, our one of our big problems at that level, particularly under Ange, was being able to keep the opponent's chance creation and more importantly goals that they were scoring, meaning something south of 2.5 or 3 a game was going to be required for us to have any chance in hell of being remotely competitive at that level. And this is where I've consistently looked at benchmarking Hatate. He's been deficient relative to Turnbull at that level. He's been deficient relative to another former Celt who's been in the news this week, Olivier Ncham, apparently going to Turkey, who I don't think anyone would have ever labeled as a defensive dynamo, even in his best days at Celtic. So that's the context, which was, and I this is where maybe him beginning to fall out of favor with a new manager like Rodgers. Um, if I'm Rodgers and I'm making advancing at a competitive level in Europe a priority through that lens, I could see someone like Hatate, you know, maybe being addressed, meaning that coached in a way and saying, listen, you got to start defending more or better and more vigorously, because it hasn't just been a matter of effectiveness. There's been a volume deficiency there. Right. And
Yeah.
that's given him.
Just just to put that into context, James, I mean, Hatate has got the lowest pressing volume stat of any of the midfielders last season, even Aaron Moy, even 32-year-old Aaron Moy, and even
Right.
Abada. He presses less than Abada. So
Right.
that's the issue for the team.
Yeah.
It's a structural issue, and it's not just him. It's the mix. Again, I keep coming back to it's the mixture because McGregor's not terrific at it. O'Reilly is, but Turnbull's not terrific at it. So if you're going to play McGregor, which you are, right, you're going to have to compensate for it in some way, which puts pressure on the other guys to step up and do more of that stuff.
Exactly. And that's to me the red herring is the issue of volume. And in a system where you're trying to have cohesive pressing and counter pressing, if one element of that structure is not kind of pulling their weight, and again, maybe it's by design that you always have to throw that in potentially because he's playing on the same side generally as Maeda, that kind of thing. Um, if I'm going to be charitable, that would be a way to maybe interpret it. But um, so again, given that kind of backdrop, um, I'm not shocked that this potentially might happen, particularly given the kind of coach and person that Rodgers is. I mean, he's not someone to suffer fools or to, I'm not calling Hatate a fool, obviously, but you know what I mean. Like he's not going to put up with somebody, as we would say in America, big timing, right? Somebody who's maybe in the locker room or dressing room not pulling their weight in that regard. And I'm not saying he's not. It's just there's a consistent set of high quality data that suggests that interpretation or that could be an issue. So whether smoke, could there
You know,
be
I mean,
fire?
it may not be attitude. It may not be attitude. Just may be capability. I mean,
Well, that's
same as
another
we
part of
can't
it, right?
make we can't make Greg Taylor faster. We can't make David Turnbull faster. We can't make Rio Hatate more mobile as far as pressing and counter pressing is concerned. These are there's probably physical limitations there. I mean, this is part of what we've been saying actually for the last year. Is that a lot of
Yeah.
this is an athleticism deficit.
Well, and I guess that's where I would interpret that because to me, he seems to have a degree of pace and quickness that shouldn't be an issue. I mean, not to the deficit that he displays, right? So that's kind of how I think about it. So again, we're it's clearly an interpolation, an extrapolation. I mean, it could be completely off base, but as outsiders, obviously, we try to connect some of these dots and read the tea leaves, so to speak. So but I ultimately the if we try to look at this from a positives and negatives perspective, if the situation was, um, we were unlikely to have midfielders that were going to be able to defend at a level that we need in Europe, something had to change and has to change. So this was always the question, like, well, who's not going to be in there? And to your point in the comment that you made, we kind of know McGregor's going to be. So that means, what's the mix in midfield to be able to play to get that third seed in the Champions League, which I think we kind of agree on would be the target for the season. Um, so somebody's got to get sacrificed, so to speak. And who is that? And in the grand scheme of things, from a defending perspective, and we'll get into that probably later in the week when we look at some of the potential new signings. We've got to prioritize chance reduction and stopping goals from being scored. I mean, it sounds simple and obvious, but I think that has to be prioritized to a degree, and so maybe this will be a blessing in disguise, so to speak, um, with all the the normal caveats that we know and understand that people have favorite players and enjoy watching certain players play, and I certainly do as well. But maybe there's a greater good that could come out of this if indeed it does end up kind of cascading in that direction. Well, let's maybe let's talk about the other new event, which was the introduction of Nawrocki in a competitive match. I'll set the table on that a little bit, which is when I kind of went through his profile and do my little benchmarking thing, the one thing that did stand out, and again, it's limited, he's young, he can develop, was that this hops metric from StatsBomb basically benchmarked him around Welsh, and I mentioned this last week, Welsh and who was the other one? I forget. But Eric Sviatchenko. Those are the two kind of hops metrics corollaries that I had, and I think we saw that already. And as he looked dynamic on the ball, he looked to be able to carry the ball. I had mentioned, the numbers look like he might have a little bit of ire in him, and I think we saw that a little bit. So I think it's a very interesting mix. I was encouraged overall, but there's going to be pluses and minuses with any player, I think. And it was interesting to see is almost in one performance that he seemed to display almost his entire data profile to a T.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think I was overall hugely encouraged, like you say, with a couple of things which have an impact on the data, and I'll come back to what I mean by that. But let's start with some of the sort of positives. So, Nawrocki had the best in terms of the highest volume of pack passes, right? So 15. Next highest was Ralston with 11, and the highest sort of pack passing score 89. The next highest was Ralston as well with 66. What does that mean? So he was getting the ball forward, very similar to Starfelt in a sense. He wasn't trying to um, get the ball to Kyogo a lot. In the first half, especially, he seemed to be able to get the ball to Maida really effectively, and then he was almost getting the ball directly to him. So centre back to sort of attacking wide player. So that was getting through the first couple of lines of not Ross County's press. It didn't happen so much in the second half, but again, we played half the game, and also Celtic were not needing to force the issue so much in that sense. You know, I'll hold my hand up. I took an instant reaction I felt just simply because I think I've said this before, simply because of the way his physical what's the word that his physical I don't know what the right word is, the dynamics of how he moves his body.
Awkwardness.
Yeah, it just looked awkward to me. He seemed to struggle to change direction, to shift weight, change from one foot to another. And Nawrocki, didn't have any of that. He looked very comfortable on the ball. And as I say, he was the leading pack passer on the day. He was also the leading progressive runs. He had 6. The next highest was 3. And again, most of those were in the first half in response to Ross County going man to man. I thought both him and Carter Vickers were pretty smart, actually. They saw the mid man to man marking was being effective, so they just ran straight at Ross County, which is exactly the right thing to do, and a smart move. So he seemed, in that sense, tactically smart. Ball progression, both with feet and with the ball, running with the ball, excellent, I thought. And then a couple of times in the second half, it was just like watching Carl Starfelt when Jordan White went up against him and he lost a couple of flick-ons, and that losing those aerial duels really depressed The thing I use as an anchor is my defensive action success rate. So, listen, one game is not good. You don't use like XG. You don't use it for one game. You need to use it over a big sample of games. So his defensive action success rate of 71, that's putting you in sort of Stephen Welsh kind of Jack Henry type territory. Carter Vickers would be around 80, high 80s to almost 90 in a sense. So you'd want, but again, White is Ross County's main outlet in terms of an attacking sense, and we know that that's what they do against Celtic. So not too worried about that. I think he lost a couple of aerial duels. They didn't amount to anything. Do you offset losing two aerial duels in the middle third with all the other good stuff he did? Of course you don't, and you didn't do that for Starfelt either. Yeah, and you've got to look at a bigger sort of sample of data. But yeah, didn't look to take us forward in terms of aerial effectiveness. And I suppose the thing that does need to be said is that at their first goal, the one thing I will say about Starfelt is, as much as he outside the box, he would often get beaten both on the ground and in the air. He'd get drawn under the ball. He'd get pulled out of position. He'd be rash into challenges in that sort of defensive third. In the box, Starfelt's one of the best defenders I think I've seen at Celtic in terms of when balls get launched into the box. Starfelt's excellent at finding a way to get on the end of it. And unfortunately for their first goal, it's Nawrocki that's marking Jordan White, and Jordan White essentially just shoves him out the way and gets his header in. And I don't think that would have happened to
Welcome to Scottish
Starfelt.
football.
Yeah, Starfelt would have been all
Yep.
over one way or another, even on the edge of legality, but he would have been very physical with him. So it, in many ways it was a freaky kind of goal. It was one of these three things wrong. The ball went across the middle of the 6 yard box. Hart was nowhere near it. Nawrocki allows himself to just get shoved a little bit by White and then loses his position. And then Kyogo falls back onto the post and then comes forward and it just drops over his head. Why did he take that step forward? So three things, and then you end up with a goal, right? It was you know, as I said before, when three things tend to happen together like that, that can often be the case. So yeah, a couple of concerns around that aerial and that physicality. Sounds very similar to other centre backs that we've had through, but I think on balance, look supremely confident. His basic ground defending excellent, and his ball progression excellent. So reasons to be cheerful in that regard.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's some of that can be addressed, particularly given his age. He can hit the weight room a little more. um, get on some creatine, and just be coached into positionally. And there's a familiarity issue. Playing in Scotland, he's going to get more used to that physicality as well. So I think those issues are more addressable, particularly given he's got the size. It's not like he's an undersized guy like Welsh, right? So he's underperforming aerially based off of various metrics given his physical profile. So I'm encouraged that can be addressed. The other stuff, the harder part, I think, the more innate stuff, meaning that, and again, it was evident to a degree in some of the benchmarking I did, is he seems to have a relatively high IQ. He seems to play with his head up. Those kind of game intelligence types of aspects that we talk about. He seems to have those. So I think that's the part that probably is most encouraging for me. Now, again, that's a long-term view. What does that mean? Meaning that, can he bulk up? Can he deal with some of these physical demands, both domestically and in Europe with the time frame that we're dealing with here? I think that's a bigger question, and I think a reasonable one to ask. And obviously, we don't have an answer for that, but I think it'll be of some kind of concern. And this is where, again, we go back to your patented phrase of toxic combinations, which is both Greg Taylor on the left with him. Holy crap, is that an aerial vulnerability, for long balls. And then having a keeper that, um, I'll say it tongue in cheek because I think it's a funny line, but is effectively becoming a potted plant on set pieces. I mean, just not moving. And it's getting to the point now where I think, even his most
Well,
adoring
it
defenders
is.
or advocates are
Yeah.
seeing it. I mean, it's you know, again, the idea of quality data and quality analysis is to see some of the things maybe emerging early. Um, and now to the point where by the time it gets to where the broad kind of consensus eye test is confirming it as well, usually that means you haven't been doing a very good job analytically. um, and I think now it's
And listen,
becoming
yeah, we don't we,
brazenly
we don't we
obvious.
don't want to labour the yeah, we don't want to labour the point, but and I hope people don't take it that way. It's just, I mean, even the second goal, right? I mean, the ball flashes off Starfelt and goes above Hart. He doesn't move. He doesn't move a muscle. Now, a young pair of eyes, a young agile keeper, I'm thinking instinctively just put something up.
Try,
He
yeah,
might not save it, but he at
right,
least puts a hand up just because it's like, holy crap, the ball's going up there. He doesn't move. He literally didn't move. He just doesn't have the reaction speed anymore. And
right.
and I'm I'm call me a drama queen if you want. That's fair enough. But I think if we persist with Joe Hart in goal all season, we potentially could lose the league. Right?
I
Is
I I
that's how serious it could be.
I agree with you. I think it's existential enough. Relative to that, meaning that it's an unnecessary. This was prior to the 2020. I was thinking about this before we came on today because I have my kind of analytical framework uh, in financial markets has reached kind of where we were after the St. Johnston game in October of 2020, which was there was a lot of kind of false bravado that was going on within the Celtic community at that time because we were, you know, ahead in the league and the results were coming in, even though some of the underlying performance trends were quite alarming, which was why I was very concerned at that point and very alarmist. Um, and that's where kind of where we're at in financial markets, global financial markets right now, in my view. Um, so I was thinking about that, and so one of the things that I have in my analytical toolkit is very focused on risk, and which is completely outside the bounds of what I think most people do in football analytics. It's just a different way of thinking about things, and to me, it's such a clear and obvious and existential risk. Like if you think about a distribution of risk, this is the left tail. Like Joe Hart is the left tail this season. It's completely unnecessary to go into and past this transfer. And I don't think we will. By the way, I'm pretty confident that
Yeah.
you know that there's going to be a change made there, hopefully. But to not do it would be really, really, um, you know, grossly negligent is what was the term I was using heading into 2020, 2021 with building the team around Brown. This would be equivalent. Like it just would be grossly negligent as far as a decision, as far as what it could introduce as far as risk to the season. Um, so I think I don't just with Brad. It's not. I don't find pleasure in pointing these things out. Um, it's just I really don't want to lose the league this year. I don't know about you, Al, but that's kind of a,
Mm.
that would be something that would be nice not to have happen. And if it's
No, indeed,
addressable and
it's absolutely yeah, it's absolutely vital. Now, other factors may conspire to allow us to win the league anyway. I mean,
right,
and hugely enjoyed the game at Rugby Park, for example. And if to use, I don't think
yeah,
we're maybe
well,
worrying unnecessarily. But we want Celtic. We're focused on Celtic's performance. We want Celtic to be the best we can be. And if we go into the Champions League with that level of goalkeeping, unfortunately, we're going to get a bad outcome because, as I said before, if Celtic do get good results in Europe, it's more than likely a goalkeeper is going to have to make 6 or 7 saves, of which 2 or 3 are going to have to probably be exceptional to nick a point or to hold on for a win in some of these tough group matches. So, can you say that that's going to be Joe Hart?
yeah,
Yeah,
and set
we don't have
pieces
the
at that
evidence for that,
level.
unfortunately.
I mean,
Hmm.
it becomes an issue of do we end up with 98 points or 94 this season? Set pieces could determine that kind of variance for Celtic domestically, but in Europe against that level of athletes, those level of quality, I mean, you just can't have an abrogation of 12 yards in front of your goal where it's basically a free for all. I mean, in that you can just dump balls into that area and have big, strong, talented players at the Champions League level competing with our defenders and players. without any real impact or even threat of a keeper coming for a ball. I mean, you would just bombard balls in. Why would you do anything else? So yeah, let's not belabor that point anymore. Um, yeah, the only thing I'll throw in relative to the weekend is in looking at the different games, we come back to the kind of the competitive landscape of the league. I wouldn't be surprised if Kilmarnock and this is not, Rangers were horrendous. I watched the game in a lot of ways, and it was delightful in that regard, but including the, Beal selection, which was just wonderful. But I think Kilmarnock's going to be a real pain in the ass this season. I mean, they've recruited in a very McInnes rugby side at Rugby Park on a crap pitch. They're going to be a big pain in the butt at home. And they're very physical. Armstrong's a big pain in the butt on the wing for them. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if they compete for top six and pretty solidly over the duration of the season. That's kind of my initial thoughts on, and it has nothing to do with that game, which again was great. But I think just generally, I think they've done enough there with McInnes as the manager, the way they play relative to the rest of the league, that they could be a real pain, almost like a Livingston, only better in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, their defenders are actually pretty good.
Yep,
They're centre backs. They're young-ish, I think. In
and a
fact, I
young
think
keeper
Dees and
too.
Finley are ex.
Young
Yeah, Dees
keeper.
and
I mean,
Finley
he
are
didn't have to do
ex
much, but
Celt.
we'll see if he's any
Yeah,
good. Yeah, yeah.
they've
Uh,
got an two ex Celtic kids and one ex Ibrox kid. So, but they're all decent players. But no, I think the last sort of point for me really, and it's probably a theme to build on over the weeks, is really just that of change. I, you know, Celtic had one player in the team on Saturday that was new, Nawrocki. The rest all played last season. I know it wasn't necessarily the first choice, and
yeah.
there have been changes in terms of, but it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that those other 10 players have all played together before on the same time. But it was discernibly different, and actually, it just shows you how delicate these things are. It really does show you how well Postecoglou had drilled that team for them to be so consistent in their performances week in, week out, even if personnel did change, the next person slotted in because they all knew their jobs. And Rodgers hasn't changed a lot, but he's just changed a little bit. And just that little bit makes it look a little bit less cohesive, a little bit less fluid. It
Yep.
wasn't a disaster. It wasn't, you know, dysfunctional. It still got the job done, scored 4 goals. As I say, XG differential, I'm more than happy with. But it just shows you this is a very delicate thing. And I'll go on. You mentioned Kilmarnock. Kilmarnock managed to integrate 8 players. Over at Ibrox, they're integrating, what is it, 9 players, and they didn't do it very well. This isn't easy. That level of change to personnel, that level of change to approach is not. It's a delicate, delicate thing, and I'm not making any grand point here. It's just a theme that I wanted to introduce, just to, as I say, to build on maybe over the next few weeks in terms of how teams respond to change.
Great points. Well, we went 13 minutes over time. Horrible
Okay.
failure as usual, but we'll bloviate still for about 17 minutes less than usual. So I think we'll wrap it up there on the review of the Ross County game. And pending speaking of big time and big shots, this Enda Cole character, we'll see if he decides to grace us with his presence then later in the week,
Is
where
he
we'll
at?
probably.
I believe. It might just be a rumor, but I think he's at Liam Scales' birthday party tonight, isn't he?
Oh, that could be it too.
Yeah, I'm
Maybe
pretty sure.
maybe Mr. Desmond sent his private jet for Enda to get him over. I
Makes
don't know.
sense.
Well, that would make sense
Makes
too
sense.
now that he's gone Hollywood on us. But yeah, we'll look forward to the Aberdeen game, which that's a very interesting analytical case. I don't know if you looked at their season last year, Alan, but I recommend you do it.
Mm.
I think they're in for a rude awakening with this managerial hire, but that's a little preview of what I'll have to say later in the week. And I think maybe we'll get into a little bit more of some of the transfer rumors and maybe by then news, depending on what goes on here in the next couple of days. So I'll try to do my end of part here. So if you can leave a review on iTunes, subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or leave comments below or subscribe to us here on YouTube. We appreciate it. It helps the channel. and really it helps pay for Enda Cole's private jet. That really is the priority here as he continues to ascend the global power structure. So thank you for watching and listening this week, and well today I should say, and hopefully we'll catch you later in the week. Take care. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, James.